Hello and welcome to Property Mastermind podcast, episode 190, Finding a Viable Development Site. Today we unpack it. We've just had our free lunchtime event where we talked about it. You're going to get a great recap on that and be inspired to get out there and look for a patch, or not just a patch, look for a viable development site. So let's jump on in to episode 190. Hey, and welcome to episode 190. Excited to be with you guys today. We are talking how to find a viable development site. Now, before we get started, the book we have to give away to Brendan Goulet. I'm not sure how you say your last name, Brendan. Anyway, this will be in the post to you. So remember, straight to page 121 where Bob talks about property development, but you're a little bit onto property development anyway, so I think that you'll really enjoy the read, even if you just read his chapter. But anyway, Bob, welcome to the episode as usual, and what's your tip for the week?
Oh, well, you probably can't tell, but you might be able to. Here's my tip. This is mainly for the guys, particularly if you shave with a razor and not an electric. If you're in a hurry, don't shave fast. I was in a hurry today to get off for a meeting, running a bit late, and I've taken a furrow out of my top lip. I've got another nick. I ended up with 3 nicks, and one of them was quite a substantial one. In fact, I've used a bit of your foundation, or I think it might have been Hilary, to cover it up because I had quite a chunk out of my top lip. So I guess, yeah, look, it's one for the guys. If you're shaving, if you're using a razor, it doesn't matter how late you are, go slow.
I have been calling you Adolf Hitler today, and I did notice that you had covered it up, so it looks a bit better. It was a massive chunk out of your upper lip. I didn't know what was going on there.
Yeah.
Anyway, Bob, we're talking finding viable sites, and who best to talk about that than you, because you've probably found more viable sites in your life than most people. 40 years in this game, you've thrown many in the bin, which will be a bit of a key takeaway, I'm sure. But we had the lunchtime event yesterday, which was... well, the feedback was fantastic, actually. So we gave away a discount to our next masterclass, which is on the 29th of March. If you want more about that, maybe we can put a link in the bottom and you might want to jump on that. Our masterclasses are going to be full of a lot more information from now on. But anyway, not just the free ones where we talk just about the process. We're actually putting things in practice and showing you how you can work through, and we're showing, what's the word I'm after here, Bob?
Well, we're going to take the theory that we learn and apply it to a project, a current project that we've just finished developing. And so, yeah, it's great to understand the theory of how to do a property development. I'm going to apply that to a project, and it'll all come together.
Yeah, and instead of just the process itself, the step-by-step, we'll go through that process, but yeah, show the application, which will really help cement the knowledge and make things seem a lot clearer, or be a lot clearer. But let's kick into finding a development site, Bob. Let's start with, what's your biggest piece of advice when it comes to finding a development site?
Well, get a couple of preliminaries done first. Don't just jump in your car and head out there and run around or go out and talk to agents until you're clear what it is that you want. And so initially, let's look at what you can afford. That'd be a good place to start. What can you afford as far as a development goes? Now, the advice is don't go too big too soon, okay? So if you're going to do a property development, do a fairly small one first up, and learn a lot from that before you step up. So don't take on too big a one, even if you're loaded with money. So the first thing to do, what can I afford to do? That could be a conversation with a good commercial finance broker. They can have a look at your financial situation and work out, well, how much can you afford to put into a development project? And look, you might have enough or you might not. If you don't have enough to do a project, you're going to have to consider getting an investor in. So start looking straight away. Otherwise, you'll know the value of the project that you can do. That'll have a lot to do with what type. So there's 2 things here that run hand in hand. What can I afford to do, and what type of project do I want to do? With most beginners, if you like, in property development, it's normally either a small subdivision, maybe a duplex, or even just a small townhouse development. So it's what you can afford. and that'll decide on the size of the project that you're going to do and the type of the project that
And
you're going to do.
Bob, I honestly feel that this is the big stumbling block because people find this so massive. It's like they see the big end goal and it's like, where the heck do I start with this thing? And so you just gave away a really great tip. Find out how much money you have to go shopping with. And we talk about this quite often. It is like going shopping. If you were going to, let's say you had a wedding, you were going to a wedding and you wanted to buy a new outfit, you would go out shopping knowing that you were shopping either at designer or perhaps you're at a particular shop, maybe you're at Myers, or worst case scenario, you're at Big W. But you would know how much you had and then you would know what you were looking for. And that's really the start of it, isn't it, Bob?
It is. It's a bit like shopping. We're going to go shopping for a site, but you're right. Like in my case, I'm not a big lover of shopping. So when I head out, I usually know what I want to buy. It might be a new pair of jeans. Pretty well got a handle on the budget, what I'm likely to spend on those, and where I want to go. And you know, I might do some research online, but I know exactly what I want. I'm heading to Myers because there's a sale on there, and I want a particular type of jeans, and that's the way I do my shopping. Not a lot different from property development. I might head out and say, okay, I can afford to do a duplex, or I've got a friend who's going to put some money in, we can do a duplex. I'm heading out to find a duplex. I suppose the other thing is, where am I going to look?
You actually just gave away 2 key points there. You have a look online before you even go looking for the jeans you're buying in Myers, but you've looked online, and that's exactly what you will do with property development. That's another key. You've given away 3 great keys already, but the next thing you said was if you didn't have enough money, you would have to borrow some off a friend. Same goes with property development. I think those were the words you used, but that's the same thing with property development, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Probably a bit more than half a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans, but yeah, look, if you don't have enough money of your own, pretty simple. Yeah, you've got to get it from somewhere, and that we'll just call that an investor. You know, it could be a friend, could be a relative, could be somebody you met at a property event, whatever it is. And the sooner that you get somebody or a couple of people in tow, the better, if you're going to need them when you find a site, because you could find one tomorrow.
Yeah, perfect. So you've just talked away about how you get started. You find out how much money that you've got to spend, whether you need to get somebody else in with you, and then the next point was where you go shopping. So let's unpack that. For finding a site, what does that actually mean, Bob?
Yeah, well, we call that our patch. So that's an area where we're going to look for a development site. Now, obvious question, well, how big is a patch? How big is it? So it could be one suburb, but it could be 2 or 3 suburbs. It just depends. It's not locked in stone, but it's an area where there's activity and there's development happening. That's always a good start. I always say start from home. You know, the easiest project, you often hear me say, the easiest project you'll ever do is if you develop your next door neighbour's property. And I've said that for years, but I've never known anybody to do it. And last week I met somebody who's actually buying the property of the person next door to where they live, and they're going to develop it. So hey, that's pretty close. You just jump the fence and they're in their property. So start where you live and go from there. There might not be a suitable patch close to where you live, or go a bit wider. And what we're looking for is, let's say, we'll pick a duplex, keep it simple. Well, where are duplexes? Is that the right word? Plural? Duplexes? I'll run with that. Where are duplexes being developed? And if they're being developed in a particular area, then that means the zoning's right. Something as simple as duplexes, it could be that you just need a site of a particular size. Anything above that, you could do a duplex. In some councils, you might need a particular zoning. But with that in mind, let's get ourselves a patch. And look, it's important not to take on too big an area. Like, for instance, say you lived in Sydney, biggest city. Sydney and Melbourne are about the same size, I think, now. You might think, oh, look, I'll do any development in Sydney. That's really keeping my options open. I'm sure to find a site soon. And the problem is this, when you find one, you won't have the depth and knowledge that you need to decide if this is the right deal for you, if it really is a good development site. So you need to narrow your focus down to a particular area and then become what we call an expert in that area, because you need really detailed knowledge to make that very important decision. Is this a profitable site, and should I go ahead with it?
Hey, Bob, you just mentioned duplex a lot, and we are talking duplexes quite a bit these days. Why is that right now? Are they stacking up currently more than three, four, fives, twos, or other products? When I say products, I mean other types of developments. Is that something that's really happening more right now?
Well, it depends on the area. It depends where you are. But yeah, duplexes have been popular in all the capital cities probably for about, the last 3 or 4 years. But there's nothing wrong with, say, a two-lot subdivision, either in building two houses. It's a little bit different from a duplex, but there's a bit more flexibility in that as well. Because when you do a duplex, you have to build the whole building. You have to build the two duplex units. Then you can subdivide and sell them separately. If you were to do a two-lot subdivision where you just end up with two lots and you want to build houses on them, you can do them one at a time. You could build one house on one lot and then, let's say, sell it and then roll your money, your profit from that into the next one. And if you do that, it's probably easier to finance. Not that financing duplexes is anything difficult, but yeah, look, a two-lot subdivision and two houses, I don't have a preference. Duplexes, they have become popular. What I've noticed a lot at the moment, though, is it's normally the more expensive duplexes that are showing the profit, not just, not duplexes in a cheap area, although generally we don't develop in cheap areas because it's very hard to make a development profit there anyway, but what we often call, upmarket duplexes. And yeah, look, there's plenty of them around. They pick the right one in the right area, they're showing profit for sure. And it's not a big project. I often call a duplex a big house with a wall up the middle.
So, Bob, okay, we've talked about knowing how much you've got to go shopping with, understanding your patch. When it comes to finding a viable site, what's generally the problem? What becomes the problem with that?
The problem can be price. It has to be financially viable. That's the point. And when we're talking about project viability, we're moving into another area that we'll do separately, I guess, and that's the numbers, doing the feasibility, because it has to show sufficient profit to get finance. Often we look at what we call the margin on cost or the return on cost to see if a project is profitable. And that's the profit as a percentage of your total cost. And it has to show certain benchmarks for a financier to finance the thing. So when I say the biggest problem is probably finding a site that stacks up, that produces sufficient profit. And, they're out there because we've got students finding deals. We've got quite a lot of students having found deals in the last 3 or 4 months. I think it's gotten easier in the last 6 months, just generally speaking, to find sites that stack up.
So let's unpack due diligence, meaning the homework that you need to do before you purchase your site, and feasibility. Now, we did talk about feasibilities last week, but let's just talk about them and how important that part is to the finding the viable site process.
Yeah, well, numbers are everything in property development. There's the old saying, the numbers don't lie. And it should be done without emotion. So certainly it's a big subject, feasibility. And today's discussion, we won't go into that depth. We've done that at other times. But it has to show sufficient profit, not just for you, not just a profit that you're happy with, but a profit that your financier is happy with. Because unless you've got a very deep pockets and lots of cash, you're going to have to finance it. And it has to be suitable, has to show enough profit for the financier to do that. So getting the numbers right, that's really important. Showing sufficient profit's very important with our site. And there's other due diligence things we need to look at, particularly, can we get the right connection for the sewer and stormwater and so forth. That's just normal due diligence that we do on development sites. So most of the time when we're buying a small development site, we're really just buying an old house. That's what we're buying. We're not buying big acres of greenfield out in the outskirts. We're buying an old house and we're going to turn it into something else. We're going to make better use of the site. So we might buy an old house, knock it down, build 2 lovely new duplex units, or perhaps 3 or 4 townhouses. Or in some cases, we don't even demolish the house. We might keep the house if there's sufficient room to get an entry beside the house, and we might go down there and build in the backyard. It could be another block where we put a house on. We could perhaps put a duplex in the backyard, whatever it is. So, yeah, we don't always demolish the old property, if we want to call it that. Sometimes we keep it, give it a bit of a reno, touch up, make it look good, and then build in the backyard. But it all comes back to the numbers no matter what, and it just has to be financially viable.
You brought up 2 points. One, I want you to explain greenfields to people because you've mentioned that word and you've already hijacked so many people's brains. They'll be like, what even is that? But the other thing you mentioned earlier, and we talk about it a lot on this podcast and, in earlier ones, we know you don't always listen to them all, but Bob brought up the point that the numbers have to stack up for a financier. So often you might think you're going to make some money, and so you're like, yes, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do that because I'm going to make at least 150,000, but that margin, the return might only be 10%, and a financier will not. No one's going to finance that project for you unless you've got very deep pockets. You don't need one. So that's the reason for that. But Bob, could you explain greenfields, please?
Yeah, well, a greenfield site typically is a larger site on the outskirts of where the development is. So quite often you'll have housing, and it keeps spreading, doesn't it? Housing keeps spreading outwards usually, and that's where you have larger subdivisions. So they're bigger greenfield sites. They might be sites for 20, 50, 100, 500 lots on the outskirts, which was previously perhaps farmland or some sort of rural land, perhaps. That's greenfield sites. What we tend to do is do infill sites. So infill sites are closer into the city, if you like, where there's already properties, but we're going to enhance the site, like I said before. Get rid of the old house, build 2 beautiful new units, 3 units, 4 units, whatever it is, some apartments. That's infill. That's using higher density, because that's really what councils and state governments want. They want better use of infrastructure. So when you're developing on the outskirts, you have to keep bringing the roads out, the sewer out, the water out, probably building new sewer treatment plants, building new schools. You have to keep extending the infrastructure. Whereas with infill developments, you don't have to do that. The roads already exist. There's sewer and water already there. There's power there. There's local schools and hospitals and shopping centres. So it doesn't put a strain on creating new infrastructure. But what you're doing is you're making better use of the land through high density development. Taking one house and creating 2 or 3, or in the case of apartments, 10 or 20 new homes, where previously there was 1 or 2.
Okay, let's unpack now market demand, because that's another major thing to consider when it comes to finding a viable site, because you might find a site and think, yes, this is perfect, I can whack 7 townhouses on there, and the rest of the properties around it have nothing like that. So clearly that is probably a bit of an indicator that it might not sell. So to sort of talk us through demand, Bob.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can pick it up a lot by driving around. You can see what sort of development, the intensity of the development, where you're looking. This is where you look when you're looking for a patch. So if you're looking for duplexes, you want to go somewhere where duplexes are being built. That's a good start. It must have worked for somebody else. It should work for you if you find the right site. And so in terms of demand, it can vary. You could have a very popular area. Let's say something seaside. Seaside properties are always in strong demand. So if you do a development near a seaside, at least from a demand point of view, it should have a fairly strong demand. You still have to find something that works, the numbers work, the feasibility works. In school zones, there's always a strong demand for housing in certain school zones, particularly if it's a really good school. People need to live in that catchment area, so there'll be strong demand there. And demand, well, look, it depends exactly on the location. What we're looking for is where there is demand, and usually it comes around infrastructure when you're doing infill. Close to transport, close to shops, those sorts of things, where there's amenity, where there's lifestyle. That's where there's demand. And some areas have hotter demand than others, so you'll probably see a higher intensity of development going on there. And that's quite normal. Near a university, there's another example of high demand areas. So it does depend a bit whether you're building for investors. That's one of the things you have to think about pretty early in the piece. Are you building for the investment market, or are you building for the owner-occupier market? it doesn't mean that one's mutually exclusive of the other, but you need to have a good idea before you start, because the design and the standard of finish can be a bit different between investment and owner-occupier stock, and even the areas that you choose. So you might have noticed some suburbs have a high percentage of rental properties. Well, that would be good to build investment properties and that sort of thing. Whereas owner-occupiers typically like areas where there's a lower number of renters and a higher number of owner-occupiers.
You can always tell a renting area, there's always a lot of cars parked everywhere because there's not enough parking. So there's usually some in the garage and some on the front lawn and multiple out the front. And oh my goodness, there's always a lot of cars parked on the street. So that's a bit of a guide, I think, for the renting area or the renting market. But you've also brought up another point, Bob, where you said owner-occupier and then the renting market. You also have to remember when you're looking for a site and whatever it is that you're going to build, you remember you're building it for the market. You're not building it for you. So you don't get attached to what you build. You want to create something that's beautiful and that sells to the market, but it's not going to have everything you want in it. And there's been many podcasts where Bob's talked about people that, the guy that came off the farm and built a 4-bedroom house with just one toilet because that was all he thought people needed. There are all sorts of things that you can consider, but the market will determine what you want. So while we're at that, Bob, how do you find out what the market wants?
Yeah, well, you've got to know your market. Look, that's not just relevant to property development. It's relevant to anything, any business at all, particularly if you're selling something, if you're manufacturing, if you're selling, if you're reselling. You need to know who your market is, because you need to give them what they want, the product that they want at the price that they're willing to pay. So property development is no different. So you need to get out into your patch. And as I said before, you need to become a local expert in your patch. And part of that is understanding what buyers want and giving it to them. So you can go out there, you can talk to agents about that, because remember, agents, particularly agents that sell new projects, they're the ones you want to talk to. There'd be a whole pile of agents in your patch. A lot of them just sell what we call resales, just older properties. You want to talk to the agents that sell new projects and get an understanding of what they're selling and what people are asking for. So you need to find those agents that sell new projects and talk to them about buyers, what buyers are looking for, buyers' expectations, and that sort of thing. Get out there. If there's development permits being lodged in your area, you need to get onto the portal or the council website and have a look at what other developers are doing, what they're designing, what they're building. Any open homes, go there as well. Have a look at. It's a great opportunity to have a look at what other builders are doing. Talk to agents. Find out what the good and the bad points about the particular products that are on the market. Make sure you pick up all the good points. Be aware of the bad things, particularly in design, and so that when it comes your turn to do a development, you'll know what the market wants. You'll know things they don't like and don't want as well, just as important. And you'll produce a good product, and it'll sell well, it'll sell fast, and it'll be profitable for you, and the buyers will be happy.
Bob, I remember you talking about that place, I think it was Auchenflower, the penthouse suite, when you built that apartment block or building, whatever it was, and there was a change to the amount of bedrooms, which made it more market, what's the word, much more popular, so people wanted to buy it. So how did that initially did it get missed initially and then you changed it, or what was the story there with that?
We bought a site with a development permit already on it for 15 apartments it was. There was 14 two-bedders, and there was a penthouse at the top, but it was just a two-bedder, but it was massive. So the two-bedroom apartments were 85 square metres each. The penthouse apartment had a deck that was 85 square metres. The deck was as big as the other apartments in there. It was quite substantial. And I don't know why they did it, but it was only a two-bedder. So we had a valuer look at that at the beginning and put a price on everything. And then we had a look at changing it. So I got the architect to make some adjustments and turn it into a three-bedder. So we added another bedroom to it. It was big enough that you could lose some room, some living area, put a third bedroom in there, and it's still very functional. I had to pick up another car park, but we juggled a few things down in the basement and managed to pick up another car park because the 3-bedder needed 2 car parks and the 2-bedder only needed 1 at the time. So we managed that. And the value, I got the valuer to revalue it. So it cost probably about $500 for the architect just to change the plans. About $7,000 to add the bedroom, because we didn't make anything any bigger. It was just some walls, a door and a built-in. And it added $180,000 to the end value. I basically spent about $8,000 or $9,000 and got a $180,000 return on it.
That's a fantastic return on investment, or a return on, it is an investment. So when you said you purchased that with a DA, why did the initial people who designed that, what were they thinking, do you think?
I don't know. They weren't actually a developer. I did get to meet them. They were a real estate agent who bought the site and had 4 old flats on it, and he got the development permit for 15 units. So he made a good profit on that, and good on him. Don't deny him making a profit. We bought it at market value, and we made a good profit by developing it.
Well, you clocked up an extra 80 grand, Bob.
Well, I'm not sure. I think he was making such a good profit anyway. I didn't care that much, and he wasn't going to build it because he wasn't a developer. I think what he did is work backwards, which some people do sometimes, because the limiting factor can be car parks. Particularly, you only got a certain amount of room underneath the apartment block. It was a semi-basement, certain amount of room for car parks. And I think they just went in there, worked out how many car parks they could do, and then worked backwards and worked out that they couldn't do a 3-bedder because they were short of a car park. And so they just went with the 2-bedder. I probably had a smarter architect, and we redesigned a few things. We moved where the security door came down and a couple of other things, juggled the visitors' car parks, and ended up getting that other car park, which then allowed us to do the 3-bedder. So I'm not quite sure why they didn't, but my goodness, it was a good return on expenditure for us.
180, sure. Yeah. I think I said 80 before, but it was 180. That's amazing. So, Bob, how does somebody negotiate better terms when it comes to buying the site?
There's 2 parts to it when you buy a site. One is the price, and that's a pretty important thing. The other thing is the terms and conditions that you buy under. And time is money in property development. Sometimes you're better off not arguing about the price if you can get a longer settlement, because a longer settlement is a really good thing for a property developer, because holding costs, particularly interest, has a big effect on your profit. Now, in an ideal situation, if you could get a long settlement on the purchase, and while you're waiting to settle, get your development permit and your building permit or construction certificate, so that by the time you settle, you're almost ready to build. That's great, because it saves all that interest if you settled right at the beginning. If you did a 30-day or a 45-day contract and had to keep paying interest while you got your approvals, even though you might be getting a bit of rent, it's not going to offset the interest on a development site. And so a longer settlement, it can be a really good thing, and that could come from just somebody not really wanting a quick settlement. Sometimes they might be selling that property to move into another one.
I think what happens, Bob, is we often think people are selling a site. We think of ourselves in a situation we've been in. We've bought another house, we want to sell it as quick as possible, and we want to move on. But it's not always like that, like you're about to allude to. Often people, maybe they need a delayed settlement because they might be building another house, or the house they're going into is not ready, or they're going into some sort of retirement style living. There are so many reasons that people don't want to settle straight away. So it always pays to just think outside the square and don't always generalise that things will be the same, because it can work in your favour massively, can't it?
It can, and as you say, not everybody wants a 30-day settlement to get their hands on the cash. And so even ask the question, like, why are they selling? Do they need what length of contract? What would what's their reason? Because often from the reason you can find out those things you mentioned there. People potentially moving into a nursing home, they might be moving into an apartment that's not finished yet, and it's not finished for 3 months. They don't want to do a double move. They don't want to settle in 45 days, move all their furniture into storage, pay for storage, then have to go and rent short-term in a motel for 2 or 3 months at a high rate, then move all their furniture again, bigger chance of getting knocked about when you're moving twice, when they could simply go for a longer settlement. And so there's a whole heap of reasons, you mentioned some of them, why they might want a longer settlement.
And there's the flip side to that, which we have had, mentoring students actually get both of those or have both of those scenarios work in their favour. And I'm thinking of the other one where the guy was the mentoring student was just buyer ready. He was good to go. He was approved, and he was all over his patch. Like, he knew exactly what had to be built, how much it was going to cost. So he knew what was happening. And a site came on the market, and he just got wind of it before it actually went to market. We're talking hours before, hours. And the owner lived in Sydney. It was rented out. It was becoming a massive hassle for him. And he's just like, I don't want to sell it. I'm done. I need this gone. I need it gone today. And that owner got 2 offers that day, from our mentoring student and one from somebody else. But the other person had just had another clause in there, subject to, but because the mentoring student that we have was all over it, knew what he was doing, knew the numbers, knew absolutely everything. He was able to get that. And I think he might have been slightly under. I don't think the offers were the same, but he might have been slightly less, but it was just a good to go. So it was a good to go sale. So it can work both ways, a delayed settlement and an instant settlement. So that sort of goes to prove that being buyer ready also has its benefits, especially if you're looking and you fully understand your patch, you've done the DD, you know what's happening. That pays off, doesn't it, Bob?
Yes, well, I know the one you're talking about. He had a pre-approval finance, so he's able to go unconditional.
That's what it was.
Just pay the deposit, go unconditional. And you're right, it was a little bit less than the other offer, but the other offer was just going to be extended, had a condition or two. I don't even know what the conditions were, but the seller, they just wanted a quick sale, a clean sale, and they just went for the unconditional lower offer. And he got it at a good price.
He did. And I think the key there, the takeaway, is just know your patch really well. So we're about to wrap this one up, Bob, but I just think, what's your biggest red flag when it comes to finding a viable development site?
Biggest red flag, don't get emotional. I've seen people with impatience rush out and end up buying something, and then in their emotion, they even know they're paying too much, but then they start to justify it and say, well, yes, but it's in a great location. I'm going to really work over the builder and get a lot of builders' quotes, and I'm going to get a cheaper building quote. I'm going to get it designed beautifully, and I'm going to get more when I sell it. And therefore, I know it's a little bit expensive, I'm going to buy it anyway. Just that impatience, particularly if people have been looking for a site for a while, they start to get a bit frustrated. They see the clock ticking. They think, oh, look, I just got to get something, and they end up, rushing into it. I've got plenty of stories about people that have rushed into buying development sites through impatience that they should have left alone.
I think that's a great takeaway, Bob. Well, thank you so much for your, as usual, fabulous input. We hope you're all out there looking for a site. We have got our next, so every couple of months we do a lunchtime 45-minute. The next one's on feasibility, so you might want to jump in on that. But we actually have our masterclass, like I said, on the 29th of March. It's a Saturday from 9 till 1 Sydney time. So if you're keen to jump in on that, there'll be a link below. It is a paid event, but it will be it will be a fantastic event. You'll want to come because, as Bob said, he will be matching up the how-to with what's the word we used? I should know this, Bob.
Well, it's a
application. That's it. We're applying it. Yeah. Yep. So we'll be applying it, and it'll be really amazing. So that's the end of this week's episode. We hope you feel inspired to get out there and get yourself a site, and we'll catch you next week. Bye.